Hello, and welcome back to Read the World. My name is Derek Main, and I review translated literature. And today I am really pleased to review the winner of the 2020 BTBA's Best Translated Book Award. And that is EEG by Daša Drndic. And it is translated by Celia Hawkesworth, and this is a New Directions paperback. So if you go back to my initial long reaction video to the BTBAs, EEG was one that I was sort of interested in, but just kind of, wasn't at the top of my list. The reason I love this award is I wouldn't probably have cracked this book, or perhaps even this author, without the BTBAs. And if you go back through my reviews, you'll see that I read 77, Good Will Come From the Sea, Tentacle. I think those are the three that I read specifically because they were on the list. And of course I had already read some others, and some others were already on my to-read list. But obviously this went right to the front once it won the BTBA. They did a lovely reading, which I will link in my YouTube channel. I believe the 3-month review, or 2-month review, 3-month, I get confused because it's 3% podcast, but I think it's 2-month review. The 2-month review on their channel, they did a replay of that, of the BTBA announcement, and Celia Hawkesworth, the translator, read because Dasa Drndic passed away. Quickly, why? I'm going to talk more about the author in this review than I typically do, and why I don't typically talk about the authors in any sort of depth, and typically don't even provide much in the way of biography. I don't biological, but in terms of biographical information, is I'm very prone to want to focus on the text of anything I read. That's just, as a reader, that's what concerns me. Certainly, if an author writes a great book, or if a translator and a publisher, I follow all those threads and all those things, but I don't, Feeble-Minded and To Die For instance, by Ariana Harwich. To Die For was one of my favorite books. Actually, it was my favorite to win the BTBA in sort of casual betting before it happened. And so I read both those books early this year. I don't know anything about her. I have no desire, I don't have that thing. And I never did with music, and I don't with writing, really. But for Daša Drndic, it was quite different because I knew something very specific about her writing, which is that she wrote about the Holocaust, and she wrote about Croatia's role in the Holocaust and fascism in general. And there was a term, I think it was called documentary fiction, that people used to describe her work, which I actually think, we'll get to in a second how she might have felt about that, but I actually think is a good description, insofar as sometimes you need a quick sort of, 2-word thing to explain to somebody how something is. Her writing is so unique, and her pacing and voice is so very much only her own, that you need some way to describe it. And I actually think documentary fiction, meaning a sort of a setup, a fictional setup, whereby we can then tell a historical story and a true story that is otherwise untold. I think that is a fine kind of way to describe it. Well, I don't have a lot of interest. I'm just going to be totally upfront, and you're going to see how ashamed I am but I have read a lot. I have seen a lot of movies. I have, in my life, consumed a lot of media about that historical time period. The most significant event of the 20th century, obviously. And I just had a little bit of a fatigue with it for the past, say, 5 years, where I was like, there's nothing really in that era that I want to explore anymore. I feel similarly right now with like Vietnam, like in that sort of content. You know, Spike Lee has a new movie, Five Bloods or The Bloods, you know, on Netflix that is about that era that a friend recommended really highly. It's got great reviews, but I don't know, for some reason that just doesn't draw me in because of how much other content I've consumed. 20 to 30 pages into this, it was clear that I was an idiot. The way she does it is different. What she is trying to accomplish is nothing like anything else I've seen covering the subject. It is more honest. It's more urgent. As odd as that sound is, more urgent. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about her. So, Dasa Drndic, and apologies for if I'm killing the name. I looked up her pronunciation, and Daša Drndić is the best I've got. She was born in August 10th, 1946, and she passed away from lung cancer on June 5th, 2018, so recently. So I'm going to I've got a couple notes here. This is from Amanda Hopkinson's obituary that she wrote on Dasha after she passed away, from The Guardian, June 13th, 2018. A major theme in her life's writing, which comprised a dozen novels and some 30 plays, has been the overlooked or deliberately omitted complicity of her native Croatia in the Holocaust, expressed in a style that has been described by critics as neo-Borgian. Dasha disliked that description as much as that of documentary fiction, another attempt to capture her particular meld of historical fact with personal testimony, and of meditations with memorabilia, bus tickets, concert programs, above all apparently random lists and photographs, all of which build their own story. Her literary hybridity lends power to what are often stories about insignificant individuals who become sadistic monsters through opportunity and sanction. Very, very well said there by Amanda Hopkinson. Her stories are about humanity. They are urgent because they repeat themselves. And it's critical that we pay attention to when they do. Let me get to that. So, Dustin Illingworth, who is a tremendous writer, interviewer, somebody you just have to follow if you're into translated lit. He had a Paris Review interview with Dasha August 21st, 2017, so about a year, well, I guess less than a year, before she passes. Appropriately titled, "There Are No Small Fascisms." This is from her first answer to a question of his. So this is Dasha's speaking. "It is not necessary to speculate about destruction, moral, social, political, ideological, artistic, etc. It is happening quite vividly and aggressively before our eyes. Also, we see how history is repeating itself, how its monstrous face is surfacing. Recently in Charlottesville, but throughout Europe and beyond, the extreme right is approaching. Fortunately still on tiptoe in les petits pas, but of course does not make it less dangerous. There are no small fascisms, no benign Nazisms. That is what I try to talk about in my books, the importance of remembering. In this age of aggressive revisionism, which tends to brainwash our already damaged, deformed minds, without memory, we are easy prey to manipulation. We lose identity." Identity, I'm not quoting anymore. This is me now. Identity is central to this work, EEG. And oddly, this is a bit of a sequel to a book I have not read, Belladonna. So that was weird, and I didn't find that out until it started. The plot of this book is fairly simple. A psychiatrist, Andreas Ban, or writer, Andreas Ban, he has a friend who's a psychiatrist who plays a role. His suicide attempt has failed, and that's on page 1. And now he's going to sort of just seep through his memory and weave together a story, the story that we've sort of been talking about and apparently was the crux of Dasa Drndic's work. So I don't know Ban's backstory from a previous novel. I just have this. And it reads at times like deathbed confessions, although the confessions are not his. Instead, what he, the narrator, is trying to do is to force you to remember the names. Because it's important to force you to listen to the victims' stories instead of always the perpetrators. The experience of reading EEG is meditative. I was 30 or 40 pages in and I was just unsure. Do I like this? This is very different. This is very weird. I'm reading someone, a narrator, a fictional person giving me a non-fictional account of a time, of people. But it's not the time I've been taught in school or read somewhere else or seen something else. These are smaller events in that time that then we zoom out and we see the bigger picture. Let me read you this. Drndic has a thing on autofiction, on Nosgard, on page 94. This is not indicative, it's not a great example, okay, of the work itself, but it sort of addresses what I was feeling in the beginning about, like, is this autofiction? Not about her life, but using a narrator to then, okay, I'm not even going to cut that because you can see the way my mind is like, what is this? Anyway, this is her take on actual autofiction, which this is not autofiction. Like Nosgard, who has already written 6 autobiographical volumes, which people devour as though they had been tottering for months in a scorching desert, and in which everything happens in real time, slowly and pallidly, because real time is no kind of time, as it doesn't exist. I've read some extracts from these idiocies of Nosgard's, absolutely intolerable unless the person reading them is riddled with holes, so the cultivation of voyeuristic instincts fills up that inner void. It would have been better for Nosgard to keep a diary, though the diaries of writers, even great writers, are fairly narcissistic and in fact tedious material. Not long ago, a well-known writer asked me, almost conspiratorially, "Do you keep a diary?" He, along with others I know, is waiting for the Nobel Prize, which of course he will not get, but who knows. Writers write mostly about themselves and their creations so that history, literary, although they also count on general world all-encompassing history, does not forget them, so that the keepers of civilization should have something to refer to when they are no more. Pure, omnipotent delirium, grandomania par excellence. People talk too much. In addition, they repeat their stupidities tirelessly, sometimes with variance in the scale of intonation, sometimes in a monotonous tone and rhythm, so that the listener feels as though he's being hit with a hammer. That's the best description of why I stopped reading all male, 50 to 60 something, white, suburban American writers, right there. Because I was being hit over the head with a hammer of these people whose biggest fear was death, and they just wanted to be remembered by history. And what she does is so much bigger and more important, but it makes her insignificant, right? Because it's not her story. It's a warning. All right, I'm gonna do a couple more. Evil, attempting to hide. Of course she writes about evil. That's a huge thing. 174. I loved this little brief. Evildoers generally love thickets, scrub, and brush, and that is why they make their camps and dig their graves there, because that is where nature is untouched, quiet. They forget that forests have ears and fields eyes, that nature is constantly awake. I love that, and I love how ominous it is, and I love how Daša Drndic is that forest, is that field, is that nature, because she's still watching and listening and going through letters and going through vast records and archives of people that are missing throughout history and trying to fill in the pieces of those stories. I just noticed that my mic is hanging down. I'm not restarting this for that, okay? So that is going to be today's accoutrement. 2 more sections I want to read. I hope I'm selling you this book. If you do not like sort of sitting down and being massaged a story, even one that has horrors within it, in other words, if you need more of a fully formed narrative, this won't be for you. Okay? And now my dishwasher wants to make like the loudest noise in the world, even though everything's going to come out dirty. If you are comfortable with bouncing around, if you like to just sort of sit there with someone as they propel you forward with their own thoughts and memories and bits of tangents, but it's all still connected to what they want to express, then you'll love it. Okay, Pigeons and Humanity, page 313. This was delectable. I like that I pronounced delectable right. That's totally a word I would screw up. Lonely old women like feeding pigeons. They collect leftover bread and go to the little parks in the center of town. As they feed the pigeons, these lonely old women scatter the crumbled bread around and coo. The pigeons coo with them. They turn in circles, waddling and shaking their tails from left to right. Once they have used up what they brought, the women leave, the pigeons stay. They wait for a new victim, a new provider. Pigeons are insatiable creatures, relentless and tenacious, but when they don't get what they want, they can become aggressive. Some people maintain that pigeons are among the most intelligent birds. I think that they are clever only when it suits them, only when those they wish to master, to manipulate, obey them unquestionably. Otherwise, pigeons can become foul, evil, and unreasonable birds, like some people. Such people, just like flocks of pigeons, like to parade in groups. Then they become brave, they shout, threaten, and generally create an unpleasant, loudish racket. When they are on their own, though, just like pigeons, such people shrink, keep quiet, pull their heads down between their shoulders, hide, look docile. Some people call pigeons flying rats. There are better birds than pigeons. I can't add anything because I can't say anything as well as that is said. But when you are looking at the right-wing death cult marching towards us throughout the Western world right now, remember, they like to parade in groups, then they become brave, they shout, threaten, and generally create an unpleasant, loutish racket. When they are on their own, though, just like pigeons, such people shrink, keep quiet, pull their heads down between their shoulders, hide, look docile. And then think about the pictures and the people that have a different kind of strength. Greta Thunberg. Think about the picture of a young African-American woman protester as she stands gun in face without blinking as some mediocre white male sits there and yells at her for existing. And her strength is in her complete unmovable nature. Who do you think wins? We'll see. This is my favorite part. I'll end with this, page 142. So in June 1940, Soviet tanks entered Riga. Life was not immediately turned upside down. During all wars, always and everywhere, people build niches, magic burrows in which they place their everyday lives, their mirages, their illusions of normalcy in order to survive. So Carlo Osterman watches people disappear. Carlo Osterman is horrified, oh yes, but these arrests, these disappearances, surely they have an explanation, an acceptable explanation. Carlo Osterman consoles himself, well, he's only 22. In all wars, people everywhere create niches, magical burrows, illusions of normalcy in which to survive. I'm doing that now. I do it oftentimes through fiction. I do it through reading. That's my escapism. Thanks to the 2020 BTBA award winner, Dasa Drndic. For a few days of my reading life, she was not going to let me. I'm going to read her entire canon, and I thank her so much for that. Be good to folks.